I'm going to read you something, and that's going to provide you context for something that happened on September 1st in 1987. The point of the cable, Schvetz said, was not to call attention to the identity of the new asset, who wasn't considered terribly important at the time, but to the practices. Successful active measure operation by which full page ads voicing KGB talking points were printed in major American newspapers. Even though the new asset had no security clearance or access to classified documents, Schvetz said, the KGB had concluded that he could still be used to channel active measures to influence influential people in the United States. As a result, they put together a bunch of sound bites to deliver important messages on various political issues that were relevant at the time. For each country, there was a specific set of sound bites, and they changed over time depending on the situation, said Schvetz. There was one set for America, another set of nuances for Britain, a third for Japan, etc. For the KGB at the time, the idea of trying to get the US to drop security relations with Japan was one of the longest lasting KGB active measures which they were disseminating. The ad was assessed by the Active Measures Directorate as one of the most successful KGB operations of the time. It was a big thing to have three major American newspapers publish KGB sound bites. More specifically, the asset had paid nearly $100,000 for full-page ads in the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, and the New York Times, calling for the United States to stop sending money to defend Japan and the Persian Gulf, an area of only, quote, an area of only marginal significance to the U.S. for its oil supplies, but one upon which Japan and others are almost totally dependent. The ads, which appeared on September 1st, 1987, ran under the headline, "There's nothing wrong with American foreign defense policy that a little backbone can't cure." And they put forth a foreign policy that, for all practical purposes, called for the dismantling of the post-war Western alliance. It took the form of an open letter to the American people on why America should stop paying to defend countries that can afford to defend themselves. It goes on to say, the world is laughing at America's politicians as we protect ships we don't own, carrying oil we don't need, destined for allies who won't help, the ad said. It's time for us to end our vast deficits by making Japan and others who can afford it. Our world protection is worth hundreds of billions of dollars to these countries, and their stake in their protection is far greater than ours. That ad was pushed out September 1st in 1987. And who was the person that put that ad out? According to Yuri Shvets, who is a former KGB agent who defected to the US, that ad was put out by Donald Trump. Since 1987, Donald Trump has been either an active asset or a useful idiot for the Kremlin, pushing forward their interests against the interests of the US. If you pay attention to that quote and tie it to what you've seen from Trump ever since he entered the political stage, what's the message that he's been sending forth? The message that he's been pushing forward is one that requires America to retreat from its alliances, retreat from its allies, assume a more isolated position in the world to the benefit of who? That's a clear answer, to the benefit of his handlers. What's the pattern that you've seen it develop from Trump from the mid-'80s to today? Everything that he talks about increasingly isolates America from its allies and creates cozier relationships between America and dictatorial regimes all over the country. It gives dictators freedom to operate, knowing that America will not come to the defense of its allies. You saw it in that 1987 ad where he's pushing Kremlin talking points in terms of foreign policy, and you've seen it ever since. Now, let's spin this forward to what we've seen more recently. What have we noticed about the events in the news? That was Yuri Shvets, who was a former KGB agent. We had yet another KGB agent come out and describe Trump as an asset controlled by the KGB. That's been widely reported at this point, and there's so much evidence that you can look at simply from the people in his administration who are connected to various Russian and foreign interests. This is a pattern of behavior. The excerpt that I read was from the book American Compromat, which details all of the shady connections between the Trump organization, Donald Trump himself, and Putin and the Kremlin. And in those connections, you have a deep intertwining of the Russian underworld that has played Donald Trump the entire time, willingly or unwillingly, and taken advantage of his greed and his susceptibility to flattery. You saw that on the debate stage during the campaign. Kamala Harris called out exactly what dictators need to do to get Trump to melt, which is flatter him and compliment him, and he'll roll over. And that's what you've seen throughout his entire career. This is somebody who is a narcissistic sociopath, who is soft, and according to the KGB and the Kremlin reports, a really low IQ, which makes him extremely easy to manipulate. And that's what we've been seeing. So when we look forward from 1987 to now, what's happened in the first handful of weeks in the administration, there's a straight line of Donald Trump engineering the US into a position that isolates us and that benefits dictatorial regimes all over the world. When you think about what Donald Trump has done in the first handful of weeks, he's dismantled any investigation that has to do with Russian influence in the election. He's dismantled anything that has to do with Russian oligarchs' influence in terms of interest in the US. All of those things have been shut down. Who does that benefit? That allows free reign for Putin and the KGB to operate freely without risk of consequences. This has been a well-established track record on the part of Donald Trump. We saw all of the reporting that happened before 2016, and we saw evidence of it in the Mueller report. And all the while, you have Trump and his minions saying the whole Russia hoax, when clearly, if you look at all of the evidence that's there, there's at least something worth investigating and digging deep into. But because of the laziness of the American press and the fear of the billionaire media owners of retribution, they've remained largely silent, and they've sane-washed this legitimately insane person for the last 10 years so that he can retain the office that he lost after the 2020 election. Make no mistake about it. It is becoming more and more clear based on actions and based on words and deeds that this is a deeply compromised administration. And everything that they're putting forward, every policy that they're putting forward runs counter to economists, foreign policy experts, energy experts, you name it. They're running a policy that runs counter to what most people who have deep expertise in this space say is the reasonable path. What you're seeing right now is a full-out sprint to rob the country blind and weaken it at the same time by embedding all sorts of Trojan horses and vulnerabilities into our systems, our processes, our methods, and our tactics to the advantage of one country. Right now, there is a case to be made that says that Donald Trump is acting on the orders of Vladimir Putin for the sole purpose of dismantling the West in order to facilitate the rise of the BRICS nations, and in particular, Russia and China. This is what the lead up is. And one of the key things that needs to happen in order for that to be accelerated is for the US economy to be crashed, for the dollar to be engineered into worthlessness, and America to be driven into isolation. Everything that you're seeing up to this point, and it's only been a handful of weeks, is engineered with that purpose in mind at the orders of the billionaires, so that the billionaires can come in and pretend to be the savior while robbing everybody blind. That is what's ahead of us. We cannot afford to take this lightly, and we need to make sure that the pressure is elevated and turned up on every business leader and elected official, regardless of party affiliation. That is how we get them to act in a way that is consistent with the danger that we're facing.